The dust kicked up from Camille Johnson's rental car settled like a shroud over the cracked asphalt of Marlowe County's Main Street. Late summer heat pressed down on everything. The faded storefronts, the Confederate flags hanging limp in windows, the eyes that followed her every move as she pulled up to the courthouse. August 1982, and nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Camille sat for a moment in the driver's seat, her manicured fingers gripping the steering wheel as she took in the scene before her. 15 years since she left this place for Howard University, then Harvard Law, then the federal prosecutor's office. 15 years of building a life that mattered, of cases that changed things, of a reputation that opened doors and commanded respect. But here, in the sweltering heart of Alabama, she was just another black woman in a place that had never wanted her kind to rise. She stepped out of the car, her cream-colored suit pristine despite the humidity, her briefcase clicking against her palm with each measured step. The courthouse loomed ahead, the same red brick monstrosity where her grandfather had been denied the right to testify against a white man, where her mother had been barred from the jury box, where justice had always worn a different face for people who looked like her. "Miss Johnson?" The voice came from the courthouse steps, trembling with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Samuel Parker stood there, with his family clustered around him like a fortress of love and fear. 45 years old, but looking older, his work-worn hands clasped in front of him, his eyes carrying the weight of a man watching his world crumble. "Miss Johnson." Camille's voice cut through the thick air, professional but warm. She extended her hand, and he took it with the desperate grip of a drowning man reaching for shore. "Thank you for coming," Lena Parker whispered, her voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the courthouse oaks. At 42, she had the quiet strength of women who had learned to endure, to bend without breaking. We didn't know if anyone would help us." Camille's eyes swept over the family. Michael, 17 and burning with the kind of righteous anger that could either forge heroes or destroy young men. Sarah, 10 years old and clutching her mother's hand, her wide eyes taking everything in with the terrified fascination of childhood confronting adult cruelty. "Tell me what happened." Camille's tone was inviting but direct. She had learned long ago that facts were weapons, and she needed every weapon she could get. Samuel's jaw tightened. "Sheriff's deputies came 3 weeks ago. Said we were behind on property taxes. Said the county was seizing the farm for unpaid debts. But, Miss Johnson, I got the receipts. I got every payment documented, every transaction recorded. They're lying." "Of course they're lying." The voice boomed across the courthouse square like thunder before a storm. Sheriff Ray Dillard swaggered down the steps, his belly straining against his khaki uniform, his badge catching the afternoon sunlight like a weapon being drawn. Behind him, his deputies fell into formation. Deputy Hank Mercer, with his cruel smile and scarred knuckles, and Deputy Linda Red Carter, with her red hair pulled back severe and her mouth set in a hard line. Dillard stopped directly in front of Camille, close enough that she could smell the stale coffee and cigarettes on his breath. He was 6'2" to her 5'6", but she didn't step back, didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her intimidated. "Well, well, well," Dillard drawled, his voice thick with mockery. "Look what this city done spit back at us. Little Camille Johnson, all grown up with her fancy education and her fancy suit, thinking she can come back here and tell us how to run our county." Camille's expression remained perfectly composed, her dark eyes meeting his without blinking. "Sheriff Dillard, I'm here representing the Parker family in a legal matter. I trust you'll conduct yourself professionally." Dillard threw back his head and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Professional. You hear that, boys? She wants us to be professional." His deputies chuckled dutifully, but Camilla caught something in Red Carter's eyes, a flicker of discomfort, quickly hidden. "Tell you what, college girl, why don't you take your professional self right back to wherever big city law firm you crawled out of?
This here is Alabama business, and we handle Alabama business our way." Michael Parker's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You can't talk to her like—" "Michael?" Camille's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. The young man's mouth snapped shut, his eyes burning but his body going still. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even looked at him, but something in her tone commanded instant obedience. Dillard's grin widened. Smart boy. Knows when to listen to his betters. His eyes raked over Camille with disguised contempt. "Course, round here, we all know our place. Some folks just need a reminding." The threat hung in the air like heat shimmer, visible and suffocating. Camille reached into her briefcase and withdrew a manila folder, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "I have a federal court order requiring the sheriff's department to provide all documentation related to the Parker property seizure. I'll need those files by tomorrow morning."
Dillard glanced at the papers but didn't take them. "Federal court order, huh? That's mighty impressive. Course, federal courts don't mean much when the local judge disagrees." "We'll see," Camille said simply, her voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. She tucked the papers back into her briefcase, the click of the clasp echoing in the sudden silence. Dillard's face darkened. "Yes, ma'am, we surely will." He turned to his deputies. "Come on, boys, we got real police work to do." As he walked away, his voice carried back across the square. Some people just don't know when they're not wanted. The inside of the Marlowe County Courthouse reeked of old wood, stale air, and institutional indifference. Judge Earl Whitcomb presided from his elevated bench like a king surveying his domain, his white hair carefully combed, his black robe somehow managing to look both authoritative and theatrical. Behind him, the Alabama state flag hung next to the American flag, a constant reminder of loyalties that had never quite aligned with justice. Camille sat at the plaintiff's table, her legal documents arranged with military precision. Beside her, the Parker family huddled together on the hard wooden benches, Samuel's arm around Lena's shoulders, Michael's leg bouncing with nervous energy, Sarah drawing invisible patterns on her dress with one small finger. At the back of the courtroom, Sheriff Dillard's deputies lined the wall like sentries. Hank Mercer lounged against the window, his arms crossed and his mouth twisted in a permanent sneer. Red Carter stood straighter, more professional, but her eyes kept flickering between Camille and her colleagues with an expression that might have been uncertainty. "The court will come to order," Judge Whitcomb announced, his gavel coming down with a sharp crack. "We are here to consider the matter of Parker versus Marlowe County Sheriff's Department regarding the seizure of property located at, well, wherever it is these people used to live." A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom from the sheriff's supporters scattered among the gallery. Camille rose smoothly to her feet. "Your Honor, if I may present the facts of this case." "Miss Johnson," Judge Whitcomb's voice cut through her words like a blade, "I trust you're familiar with courtroom protocol in Alabama. You will speak when spoken to, not before." "Of course, Your Honor. I was simply—" "What you were doing," Whitcomb interrupted again, his voice rising with affected indignation, "was attempting to lecture this court on procedure. Now, I understand things might work differently in whatever northern establishment taught you to practice law, but down here, we show proper respect for judicial authority." More laughter from the gallery. Sheriff Dillard's voice boomed out from the back. "That's telling her, Judge." Camille remained standing, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "My apologies, Your Honor. May I proceed with my opening statement?" "You may not," Whitcomb replied with visible satisfaction. "First, we'll hear from the county's representative regarding the lawful seizure of abandoned property." Deputy Hank Mercer swaggered to the witness stand, his uniform too tight across his barrel chest and his boots clicking against the worn wooden floor with each step. He raised his right hand for the oath with theatrical solemnity.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" The bailiff droned. "I surely do," Mercer replied, his grin wide and predatory. Whitcomb leaned forward conspiratorially. "Now, Deputy Mercer, tell us about the Parker property situation." "Well, Your Honor, the Parker family fell behind on their property taxes, way behind. We served them notice after notice, but they just ignored us. County had no choice but to seize the land for unpaid debts." "And did you personally serve these notices?" Whitcomb prompted. "Yes, sir, I surely did. Served them multiple times. Family was always home, always acknowledged receipt, but they just didn't care enough to pay what they owed." Samuel Parker half rose from his seat. "That's a damned lie." "Order!" Whitcomb's gavel crashed down. "The defendant will control his outbursts or be removed from this courtroom." Michael's hands gripped the edge of the bench until his knuckles went white. His mother's hand closed over his wrist in warning, but his young face burned with the injustice of watching his father be silenced while lies were told about their family. Camille stood again, her voice calm and measured. "Your Honor, may I cross-examine the witness? You may ask a few questions, but keep it brief. We all have other things to do today."
Camille approached the witness stand with the measured pace of a hunter closing in on prey. "Deputy Mercer, you testified that you personally served multiple notices to the Parker family. Do you have copies of those notices with you today?" Mercer's confident smile flickered slightly. "Well, no, ma'am. They'd be back at the office." "I see. And do you have documentation showing when these notices were served? Dates, times, witnesses?" "Course I do. It's all properly filed away." "But not here today." "No, ma'am. Didn't think to bring every little piece of paper." Camille moved closer, her voice remaining conversational, but gaining an edge that made several people in the gallery lean forward. "Deputy Mercer, in your testimony, you stated that the Parker family always acknowledged receipt of these notices. Can you describe how they acknowledged receipt?" Mercer shifted in his seat. "Well, they took the papers, said okay, that kind of thing." "Did they sign anything? Any written acknowledgement of service?" Well, not exactly signed, but yes or no, Deputy Mercer. Did the Parker family sign any document acknowledging receipt of these tax notices?" The silence stretched for several seconds. In the gallery, Sheriff Dillard's face had darkened like a thundercloud. Red Carter's eyes had fixed on the floor. "No, ma'am," Mercer finally admitted. "But that don't mean—" "Thank you," Camille cut him off smoothly. "No further questions." Judge Whitcomb's face had gone slightly pale, but his voice boomed with renewed authority. "The witness may step down. Miss Johnson, do you have any evidence to present, or are we done with this exhibition?" "Your Honor, I have extensive documentation that directly contradicts Deputy Mercer's testimony. Property tax records showing all payments current, correspondence with the county tax office, receipts for—" "Objection!" Dillard's voice boomed from the back of the courtroom, even though he wasn't officially part of the proceedings. "Your Honor, this is clearly a case of someone trying to muddy the waters with paperwork and fancy legal tricks. The facts are simple. The property was seized legally, and that's the end of it." Whitcomb nodded sagely. "Sustained. Miss Johnson, this court will not be turned into a circus of endless documentation and legal maneuvering. The county's position is clear and lawful." "Your Honor, with respect, Sheriff Dillard is not acting as counsel in this matter and has no standing. Don't you tell me about standing, young lady. This is my courtroom, and I'll decide who speaks and when they speak." The entire gallery erupted in a mixture of supportive applause and nervous murmurs. Michael Parker shot to his feet, his 17-year-old voice cracking with rage. "This is bull—" "Michael, sit down." Camille's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, sharp and absolute. Again, the young man obeyed instantly, though his entire body vibrated with fury. Dillard's laughter boomed across the courtroom. "Boy knows quality when he hears it. Smart to listen to his lawyer. She might be the only thing standing between him and some serious trouble." The threat was unmistakable, delivered with a grin that made it clear the sheriff enjoyed making it. Camille turned slightly, her eyes meeting Dillard's across the crowded room. For just a moment, something flickered in her expression. Not fear, not anger, but something colder and far more dangerous. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, Whitcomb announced abruptly, his gavel coming down with finality. We'll continue this matter then, assuming everyone can conduct themselves appropriately. The courthouse corridor stretched before Camille like a gauntlet, its dim fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the faded institutional green walls. Her heels clicked against the worn linoleum with each measured step, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet that had descended after the chaos of the courtroom. She had sent the Parker family ahead, urged them to go home and rest before tomorrow's continuation of the hearing. Samuel had hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his trust in her judgment, but Lena had taken his arm and guided him toward the exit. Michael had lingered until his mother's sharp look sent him reluctantly after his parents, his young shoulders rigid with anger and helplessness. Now Camille was alone in the quarter with her thoughts, her briefcase, and the weight of 15 years of fighting battles just like this one. She paused at the building's main entrance, fishing in her purse for her car keys, when steps echoed behind her.
"Hold up there, counselor!" Deputy Hank Mercer's voice cut through the silence like a rusty blade. Camille turned slowly, her expression composed, as Mercer approached with his characteristic swagger. Behind him, Deputy Red Carter followed at a more reluctant pace, her hand resting unconsciously on her service weapon. "Deputy Mercer," Camille said evenly. "Deputy Carter, can I help you with something?" Mercer's smile was all teeth and no warmth. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the crude tattoo on his forearm, a Confederate flag wrapped around a skull. Close enough that his physical presence became a form of intimidation, his height and bulk designed to make her feel small and vulnerable. "See, here's the thing," Mercer said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow managed to be more threatening than shouting. "We got ourselves a situation here. You come rolling into our county with your fancy education and your big city ways, stirring up trouble for good people just trying to do their jobs." "I'm representing a family that was wrongfully evicted from their property," Camille replied, her tone remaining professionally neutral. "That's not stirring up trouble, that's practicing law." "That's your opinion," Carter spoke up, her voice tight with nervous energy. "But around here, we got our own way of handling things. Community takes care of community, you understand? Outsiders—" She let the word hang in the air like a curse. Mercer nodded approvingly. "Red's 'bout a point. See, Miss Johnson, you might have impressed some folks back in whatever liberal paradise you crawled out of, but down here, we appreciate loyalty. We appreciate people who understand their place." He stepped closer still, forcing Camille to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. The move was calculated, designed to emphasize her physical disadvantage, to remind her that she was alone in this dim corridor with two armed law enforcement officers who clearly didn't consider her an equal. "And what place would that be, Deputy?" Camille asked, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. "Smart women know when to mind their own business," Mercer said, his grin widening. "They know when they're outmatched. They know when it's time to pack up their pretty little briefcases and head back to where they came from before something unfortunate happens to them or the people they're trying to help." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The threat against the Parker family sent a chill through the corridor, but Camille's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed to grow calmer, more centered, like a storm gathering its strength. "Is that a threat, Deputy Mercer?" "Me? Threaten a respected attorney? Course not. I'm just making conversation, sharing some friendly advice about how things work around here." He leaned down until his face was level with hers, his breath hot against her cheek. The move was calculated, designed to emphasize her physical disadvantage, to remind her that she was alone in this dim corridor with two armed law enforcement officers who clearly didn't consider her an equal. And what place would that be, Deputy? Smart women know when to mind their own business, Mercer said, his grin widening. They know when they're outmatched. They know when it's time to pack up their pretty little briefcases and head back to where they came from before something unfortunate happens to them or the people they're trying to help. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The threat against the Parker family sent a chill through the corridor, but Camille's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed to grow calmer, more centered, like a storm gathering its strength. Is that a threat, Deputy Mercer? Me? Threaten a respected attorney? Course not. I'm just making conversation, sharing some friendly advice about how things work around here. He leaned down until his face was level with hers, his breath hot against her cheek. The move was calculated, designed to emphasize her physical disadvantage, to remind her that she was alone in this dim corridor with two armed law enforcement officers who clearly didn't consider her an equal. Is that a threat, Deputy Mercer? Me? Threaten a respected attorney? Course not. I'm just making conversation, sharing some friendly advice about how things work around here. He leaned down until his face was level with hers, his breath hot against her cheek. The move was calculated, designed to emphasize her physical disadvantage, to remind her that she was alone in this dim corridor with two armed law enforcement officers who clearly didn't consider her an equal. Deputy Mercer, I think you're underestimating me. Am I now? And what exactly am I underestimating, college girl? My resolve, Camille said simply. My resources, my patience with men who mistake cruelty for strength and intimidation for authority. She stepped around him with fluid grace, her movement so smooth and confident that both deputies had to adjust their positions to keep facing her. The simple act somehow shifted the dynamic in the corridor, making them react to her rather than the other way around. You see, gentlemen, excuse me, Deputy Carter, I've spent the last 15 years dealing with men exactly like you. Men who think a badge gives them the right to terrorize families, steal property, and corrupt everything they touch. And do you know what I've learned in those 15 years? Neither deputy answered, but something in Carter's eyes flickered, a mixture of curiosity and growing unease. I've learned that bullies are always cowards. They pick on people they think can't fight back. They choose victims they believe are helpless, but they make critical errors in judgment when they assume that
Someone like me, someone who looks like me, someone who grew up in a place like this, must be helpless. Mercer's face was darkening, his hands slowly clenching into fists. You think you're real smart, don't you? Think your fancy words are going to protect you when what, Deputy? Camille interrupted, her voice sharp as breaking glass. When you decide to add assault on an attorney to your growing list of criminal activities? When you confirm everything I already suspect about the corruption in this department? When you hand me exactly the evidence I need to destroy everything you've built here? Carter took a step back, her face going pale. Hank, maybe we should— Shut up, Red, Mercer snapped, but his confidence was clearly shaken. Don't let her get in your head with her lawyer tricks. Camille smiled then, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. Deputy Carter, you seem like a smart woman. You've been quiet during most of this conversation, but I can see you thinking. You're wondering what I know. You're wondering what evidence I might have. You're wondering if this is really a fight you want to be part of. I'm wondering why you keep pushing when you're clearly outnumbered. Carter replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Because I know something you don't, Camille said, her tone growing conversational again,
almost friendly. Something that's going to become very clear very soon. She turned toward the exit, then paused, looking back over her shoulder with an expression that was almost pitying. "Deputy Mercer, you should tell Sheriff Dillard that his investigation has been compromised. Tell him that whatever timeline he thought he was working with just got significantly shorter. Tell him that the people he's been so confident he could intimidate aren't quite as helpless as he assumed." The corridor fell silent except for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. Camille walked toward the exit with unhurried steps, her heels clicking against the linoleum in a rhythm that sounded almost like a countdown. Behind her, Mercer's voice rose with frustrated rage. "You think you're real clever, but you have no idea what you're walking into. This county belongs to us. We decide who stays and who goes. You keep pushing, and you're going to find out just how far we're willing to go to protect what's ours." Camille paused at the exit door, her hand on the push bar, and turned back one final time. Her voice carried clearly down the corridor, calm and implacable as judgment itself. "Deputy Mercer, I'm counting on it." Then she was gone, stepping out into the thick Alabama dusk, leaving behind two deputies who suddenly understood they might have misjudged their opponent more catastrophically than they had ever imagined. The gravel road to the Parker farm stretched before Camille like a scar across the Alabama countryside, red dust kicking up behind her rental car in lazy clouds that hung in the still evening air. The sun was setting behind a wall of pine trees, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, casting long shadows across fields that had once been green with crops and hope. What she found when she reached the farm made her chest tighten with anger so pure it was almost physical pain. The house still stood, a modest white clapboard structure with a wraparound porch that had seen better decades, but everything else spoke of systematic destruction. The barn doors hung open like broken jaws, padlocks glinting on posts where livestock pens had been dismantled. Survey stakes dotted the property like grave markers, each one bearing the logo of Dillard Development Corporation in letters bold enough to be read from the road. Samuel Parker sat on his front porch steps, his work boots planted in the dust where his wife's flower garden had been torn up, and his hands clasped between his knees in the posture of a man who had watched his world end in real time. Lena stood in the doorway behind him, her face etched with the kind of exhaustion that sleep could never cure. "Mr. Parker," Camille said softly as she approached, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. "Mrs. Parker." Samuel looked up, his eyes holding a mixture of gratitude and something that might have been shame. "Thank you for coming out here, Miss Johnson. I know it's not much to look at anymore." "Tell me what happened," Camille said, settling onto the porch step beside him with an ease that would have surprised anyone who had seen her in her courthouse battle armor. Out here, away from the posturing and performance of the legal system, she was something different, warmer, more human, but no less dangerous. Michael appeared around the corner of the house, his 17-year-old frame lean and hard from farm work, his face set in the permanent scowl of youth confronting injustice. In his hands, he carried a manila envelope thick with papers. "Show her, Daddy," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Show her what they said we owed." Samuel took the envelope with hands that trembled slightly. Not from fear, Camille realized, but from rage held too long in check. He withdrew a stack of official-looking documents, each one stamped with the Marlowe County seal. "According to this," Samuel said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, "our family owes $47,000 in back taxes, penalties, and fees dating back 15 years. $47,000 on a farm that ain't never been worth more than $20,000 in its best year." Camille took the papers, her trained eye scanning the official language and finding inconsistencies that would have made a first-year law student laugh. Dates that jumped around chronologically, calculations that didn't add up, signatures that looked suspiciously similar despite supposedly coming from different county officials across different years. "This is fraud," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Systematic, coordinated fraud designed to steal your property through false documentation. That's what I tried to tell him, Michael burst out, his young voice cracking with emotion. But who's gonna listen to us? We're just farmers. We're just… Michael. His mother's voice cut through his rising anger like a gentle blade. Watch your tongue. No, Mama, I'm tired of watching my tongue. I'm tired of being polite while they steal everything we got. He turned to Camille, his eyes blazing with the kind of idealistic fury that could either change the world or get him killed. You want to know what really happened? They didn't just take our land. They took our livestock to cover storage fees. They took our equipment to cover transportation costs. They took 3 generations of work and called it legal. Camille looked up from the fraudulent documents to study the young man's face. She saw her younger self there, the burning need for justice, the refusal to accept that the system was rigged, the dangerous belief that truth mattered more than power. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked, quietly. "Fight," Michael said, immediately. "Fight them with everything we got. Fight them until they choke on their own lies. And when they come back with guns and badges and the full weight of the county behind them," Camille asked, her voice gentle but relentless, "when they decide that a young black man with a big mouth is a threat that needs to be eliminated, what then?" The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of history, with the names of young men who had dared to fight and paid for it with their lives. Michael's jaw worked soundlessly, his hands clenching and unclenching as he struggled with the impossible mathematics of resistance. "There's a smarter way," Camille continued, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher guiding a student toward a difficult truth. "There's a way to fight that doesn't give them an excuse to hurt you or your family. But it requires patience, it requires trust, and it requires you to let me handle this my way." Samuel's voice was quiet but firm. "What's your way, Miss Johnson?" Camille stood, brushing dust from her skirt, and looked out over the devastated farm with eyes that seemed to be calculating something invisible to the others. "My way is to give them enough rope to hang themselves. My way is to let their arrogance and their greed lead them into making mistakes they can't walk back from. My way is to make sure that justice comes with enough force to make them understand they picked the wrong family to victimize." "And if your way doesn't work?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Camille's smile was sharp as winter morning. "Mrs. Parker, I didn't come back to Marlowe County to lose." As if summoned by her words, the sound of engines rumbled in the distance, heavy trucks moving fast on gravel roads, getting closer. Michael tensed like a spring ready to snap, his hand instinctively moving toward the baseball bat leaning against the porch railing. "Easy," Camille said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Let 'em come. Let 'em show us exactly who they are." The headlights swept across the Parker farmhouse like searchlights hunting for escaped prisoners, cutting through the humid darkness with predatory intent. 2 sheriff's department cruisers bumped and lurched up the gravel driveway, their engines growling low and threatening, their red and blue strobes painting the white clapboard walls in alternating colors of emergency and menace. Camille stood on the front porch in her cotton nightgown and bare feet, having thrown on a light robe when the sound of approaching vehicles had woken her from uneasy sleep on the Parkers' couch. She had insisted on staying the night, claiming it was more convenient than driving back to the county's single motel. But everyone understood the real reason. Predators were more cautious when they knew they had witnesses. The cruisers pulled to a stop in a spray of gravel and dust, their headlights remaining on high beam, flooding the porch with harsh white light that made it impossible to see the men behind the windshields. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The engines idled, the lights blazed, and the night held its breath, like a town waiting for a tornado to decide which way it would turn. Then the doors opened. Deputy Hank Mercer stepped out of the lead cruiser with theatrical swagger,
his uniform crisp despite the late hour, his hand resting casually on the grip of his service weapon. Behind him came Deputy Red Carter, moving with more reluctance but matching his pace as they approached the house together. "Evening, folks," Mercer called out, his voice carrying false cheer that sounded obscene in the darkness. "Sorry to disturb your beauty sleep, but we got reports of suspicious activity out this way. Thought we'd better check it out." Camille didn't move from her position on the porch, didn't retreat toward the door or call for the Parker family. Instead, she stepped forward into the harsh glare of the headlights, her posture straight and unafraid, her dark skin gleaming in the artificial daylight. "Deputies," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard, "it's after midnight. What suspicious activity are you investigating?" Mercer's grin was visible even in the harsh shadows cast by the lights. "Well now, that's interesting. See, we got a call about strangers on the property. Folks concerned about trespassers, vagrants, that sort of thing. But here you are, acting like you belong." "I'm a guest of the Parker family," Camille replied evenly. "Is there a law against staying overnight at a friend's house?" "Depends on what you're doing while you're here," Carter spoke up, her voice tight with nervous energy. "Depends on what kind of trouble you might be planning." Behind Camille, the front door opened with a soft creak. Samuel Parker appeared in the doorway, his work pants hastily pulled on over his undershirt, his face set in hard lines of anger and fear. Behind him, Lena hovered in the shadows, her hand on Michael's shoulder, keeping her son from pushing past his father into the confrontation. "There's no trouble here, officers," Samuel said, his voice carefully controlled. "Miss Johnson is our lawyer, and she's staying here as our guest. We're not breaking any laws." "Your lawyer," Mercer repeated, as if the words tasted bad in his mouth. "That's real nice, Samuel, real touchin'. But see, here's the thing. We got ourselves a problem with outside agitators coming into our county, stirring up trouble for good, honest folks just trying to do their jobs." He stepped closer to the porch, close enough that Camille could see the cruel satisfaction in his pale eyes. "And when we got problems with agitators, sometimes we gotta take steps to remind them that they ain't welcome here." "What kind of steps would those be, Deputy?" Camille asked, her tone remaining conversational despite the clear threat. Instead of answering directly, Mercer turned to Carter with exaggerated casualness. "Red, you remember what happened to that civil rights worker back in '79, the one who came down from up north, thought he was going to save all the poor, oppressed folks in Marlowe County?" Carter's face went pale in the harsh light, but she played her part. "I remember. Car accident, wasn't it? Terrible thing. Ran off the road late at night, rolled down an embankment. They said he must have fallen asleep at the wheel." "That's right," Mercer nodded sagely. "Course, some folks said he'd been drinking. Others said maybe he was distracted by something. But the end result was the same. One less troublemaker causing problems for decent folks." The threat hung in the humid night air like smoke from a house fire, visible and suffocating. Michael Parker's breathing had become audible from the doorway, harsh and rapid with barely controlled rage. His mother's grip on his shoulder tightened, her knuckles white with the effort of holding him back. Camille took another step forward, moving off the porch entirely now, walking down the wooden steps with careful, measured paces that brought her closer to the two deputies. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to every survival instinct a reasonable person should have, that both officers actually took a step backward. "Deputy Mercer, Deputy Carter, I want you to listen to me very carefully because I'm only going to say this once." She stopped just outside arm's reach, close enough that the headlights created a harsh halo around her figure, close enough that both deputies could see the absolute absence of fear in her dark eyes.
I am not some frightened college student you can intimidate with ghost stories. I am not some naive do-gooder who doesn't understand how the world works. I am a federal prosecutor with 15 years of experience dealing with corrupt law enforcement officers who think their badges make them untouchable. Mercer's hand tightened on his weapon, but something in Camille's tone made him hesitate to draw it. "You threatening us, college girl?"
"I'm educating you," Camille replied, her voice growing softer and more dangerous with each word. See, the thing about corrupt cops is they always make the same mistake. They assume that everyone else is as stupid and helpless as the people they usually victimize. They assume that intimidation will work because it's always worked before. She took one more step forward, forcing both deputies to either retreat further or risk being close enough for her to grab their weapons if she chose to. Both men stepped back. "But here's what you don't understand about me," Camille continued. "I've spent my entire career studying men like you. I know how you think, I know how you operate, I know your weaknesses, your patterns, your tells. And most importantly, I know exactly how much rope to give you before you hang yourselves." Carter's voice cracked slightly when she spoke. "You can't prove anything." Camille's smile was sharp as a blade in winter sunlight. "Can't I? Deputy Carter, how long have you been filing false reports? How many families have you helped steal from? How many innocent people have you watched your colleagues brutalize while you stood by and did nothing?" "I'd never," Carter began, but Camille cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't lie to me, Deputy. We both know you're better than this. We both know you've been having second thoughts about the direction your department has taken under Sheriff Dillard's leadership. We both know you're smart enough to recognize that this little midnight intimidation visit is going to be the mistake that brings everything crashing down." The night fell silent, except for the idle rumble of the cruiser engines and the distant sound of crickets in the fields. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called once and fell quiet, as if even the wildlife was holding its breath to see how this confrontation would end. Finally, Mercer found his voice again, though it sounded less confident than before. "You talk real tough for someone who's all alone out here in the dark with two armed officers." "Am I alone?" Camille asked, glancing around the yard with theatrical curiosity. "Are you sure about that, Deputy?" Both officers instinctively looked around, their hands moving toward their weapons, suddenly aware that the darkness beyond their headlights could be hiding anything. In that moment of distraction, Camille's voice cut through the night like a judge pronouncing sentence. "You have until sunrise to decide which side of history you want to be on. After that, the choice gets made for you." She turned and walked back toward the house with unhurried steps, her bare feet silent on the wooden porch stairs. At the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and deputies, the next time you want to intimidate someone, you might want to make sure you're not being recorded." Both men's eyes widened as they looked around frantically, searching the darkness for evidence of surveillance equipment they couldn't see. Carter's hand moved to her radio, but Mercer grabbed her wrist. "Come on," he said, his voice tight with uncertainty. "We're done here." They retreated to their cruisers with less swagger than they had arrived with, their headlights sweeping across the farmhouse one final time before they disappeared into the Alabama night, leaving behind only the settling dust and the echo of their threats. The second day of the hearing dawned gray and oppressive, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an army preparing for battle. The courthouse stilled earlier than the previous day, word having spread through Marlowe County's gossip network that the city lawyer had gotten under Sheriff Dillard's skin and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Camille sat at her table with the same military precision as before, but something had shifted in her demeanor overnight. Where yesterday she was cautious, feeling out her opponents, today she moved with the confidence of a hunter who had taken the measure of her prey and found it wanting. Judge Whitcomb took his bench with theatrical pomposity, his black robes billowing as he settled into his chair with the satisfied air of a man who believed he controlled everything in his domain. Behind him, the American and Alabama flags hung limp in the still air, their colors muted by the gray light filtering through the tall windows. "Court is now in session," Whitcomb announced, his gavel coming down with its familiar crack. "We will continue with the matter of Parker versus Marlowe. Miss Johnson, I trust you are prepared to conclude your presentation today? I am, Your Honor. Camille rose smoothly to her feet. I'd like to call Deputy Linda Carter to the witness stand. A ripple of surprise ran through the courtroom. In the back, Sheriff Dillard's face darkened with suspicion, his eyes narrowing as he focused on his female deputy. Red Carter herself went pale, her hand instinctively moving to her throat, as if she suddenly couldn't breathe. "Objection!" Sheriff Dillard called out from the gallery, even though he had no official standing in the proceedings. "Sheriff Dillard," Camille said, turning to face him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're not counsel in this matter. You have no standing to make objections."
Whitcomb's gavel came down hard. The sheriff's objection is sustained anyway. Miss Johnson, you can't just call witnesses willy-nilly without proper notice. Your Honor, Deputy Carter was present at the Parker property during the eviction proceedings. Her testimony is directly relevant to the case at hand. Surely the court is interested in hearing all the facts. The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Whitcomb could refuse to let Carter testify, but doing so would make it obvious that he was actively protecting the sheriff's department rather than seeking truth. His face flushed as he realized the trap Camille had laid for him. "Very well," he said grudgingly. "Deputy Carter may testify, but keep it brief." Red Carter made the walk to the witness stand like a condemned woman walking to the gallows. Her usual confident stride had been replaced by hesitant steps, and her face had taken on a greenish pallor that had nothing to do with the gray morning light. The bailiff administered the oath, and Carter raised her right hand with visible reluctance. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," she whispered, the words barely audible in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Camille approached the witness stand with the same measured pace she had used the day before. But today, there was something different in her movements, a predatory grace that made several people in the gallery shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Deputy Carter, you were present during the eviction of the Parker family from their property 3 weeks ago, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "And during that eviction, did you personally observe the serving of any tax documents or eviction notices to the Parker family?" Carter's eyes darted toward Sheriff Dillard, who was glaring at her with undisguised menace. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the arms of the witness chair. We served the appropriate papers, yes, ma'am." "I didn't ask if papers were served, Deputy. I asked if you personally observed their service. Did you see anyone from the sheriff's department hand tax documents directly to a member of the Parker family?" The silence stretched for several seconds. In the gallery, Dillard leaned forward in his seat, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Deputy Mercer sat beside him, his scarred knuckles white as he gripped the back of the pew in front of him. Carter's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I wasn't busy with other duties during the eviction. I may not have seen every interaction." "I see. So you cannot personally testify that proper notice was given to the Parker family before their eviction." "Objection," Whitcomb called out, apparently objecting to his own proceedings. "The witness is not required to have observed every detail of a complex law enforcement operation." "Your Honor," Camille replied smoothly, "the witness is only required to tell the truth about what she did and did not observe. If she didn't see proper notice being served, she should say so." Carter's breathing had become rapid and shallow, her face now showing a sheen of perspiration despite the cool morning air. I assume proper procedures were followed." "Deputy Carter, I'm not asking you to assume anything. I'm asking you to testify about what you personally saw and heard. Did you observe the Parker family being given an opportunity to respond to the tax documents? Did you hear them acknowledge receipt of any legal papers?
I... Carter's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. No, ma'am, I didn't observe that. A murmur ran through the courtroom like wind through wheat. In the front row, Samuel Parker sat up straighter, his eyes widening with something that might have been hope. Michael gripped his mother's hand so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. And Deputy Carter, Camille continued, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. During yesterday's testimony, Deputy Mercer stated that the Parker family always acknowledged receipt of tax notices. Based on your personal observations, would you say that testimony was accurate? The courtroom held its breath. Even the air seemed to stop moving as everyone waited for Carter's response. The deputy's eyes moved frantically between Camille, Judge Whitcomb, and Sheriff Dillard, like a trapped animal looking for an escape route that didn't exist. She began, then stopped, started again. I wasn't present for all of Deputy Mercer's interactions with the Parker family. But you were present for the eviction itself, correct? And during that eviction, did you observe any evidence that the Parker family had previously been served with proper legal notice? Carter's hands shook as she gripped the witness chair. There were documents, but
Yes or no, Deputy Carter? Based on your personal observations during the eviction, did you see any evidence that the Parker family had been properly served with legal notice before their property was seized? The silence that followed was deafening. In it, the sound of Carter's rapid breathing seemed loud as thunder. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back furiously, her professional composure finally beginning to crumble under the weight of truth. No, she whispered, the word barely audible. Then louder, with something that might have been relief. No, ma'am. I did not observe any evidence of proper legal notice. The courtroom erupted. Sheriff Dillard shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. That's enough. Your Honor, this is clearly a case of witness intimidation. Sheriff Dillard, sit down. Whitcomb's gavel crashed repeatedly, but his authority was slipping with each bang. Order! I'll have order in this courtroom. But the damage was done. Red Carter had cracked, and everyone in the room could see it. Her testimony had contradicted Deputy Mercer's sworn statement, casting doubt on the entire eviction process. More importantly, her obvious distress suggested there was much more she wasn't saying. Camille stood in the center of the chaos, calm and unmoved, watching the system that had seemed so solid the day before begin to show its first hairline fractures. She had planted the seeds of doubt, exposed the lies, and forced one of their own to choose between loyalty and truth. As the judge's gavel continued to bang and voices rose in confusion and anger throughout the courtroom, Camille caught Red Carter's eye one final time. The deputy's face was streaked with tears now, her careful professional mask completely gone, replaced by something raw and human and desperately afraid. But in that fear, Camille saw something else. The first glimmer of a woman ready to tell the truth no matter what it cost her. The wall of corruption was beginning to crack, and once it started, Camille knew exactly how to bring the whole thing crashing down. Samuel Parker emerged from the hardware store when Deputy Hank Mercer materialized from the alley blocking his path to the truck. Well, well, if it ain't our famous plaintiff. How's it feel, Samuel, having that city lawyer make you look like a fool? I've shown you all the respect you deserve. Mercer's face flushed red. Without warning, he shoved Samuel backward against the brick wall, sending screws scattering across the sidewalk. Hey! Michael Parker charged from across the street, tire iron in hand. Get away from my father! Mercer spun toward the teenager, hand on his gun. Drop it, boy! Drop it right now, or I'll put you down. The scene balanced on a knife's edge, until a voice cut through the tension. That's enough! Camille Johnson stepped from the sheriff's office, her heels clicking with measured precision.
Both men froze at the absolute authority in her voice. Michael, put down the tire iron and step back. The young man hesitated, then obeyed. Deputy Mercer, remove your hand from your weapon before you do something that will haunt you for the rest of your very short career. You can't tell me how to do my job, lawyer. This young man was defending his father from an unprovoked assault. But people are always watching. They're remembering everything they see. As the Parkers left, Mercer stepped closer to Camille. You think you're real smart, don't you? I think you're scared. I think you're starting to understand that your little kingdom is crumbling. Mercer's hand moved toward his weapon, but Camille's next words stopped him cold. Go ahead. Give me exactly what I need to finish this. In Judge Whitcomb's chambers, Camille entered without knocking and settled into the chair across from his desk uninvited. Tell me, Your Honor, how long have you been taking money from Sheriff Dillard? Whitcomb's head snapped up, face flushing red. How dare you? I should hold you in contempt.
You should listen, Camille interrupted. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. Your judicial decisions over the past 5 years show a pattern of bias so obvious it would be laughable if it weren't so destructive. The county's position has been legally sound. The county's position has been criminal, Camille said flatly. And you've been their willing accomplice. She leaned forward. Corruption always leaves a trail, Your Honor. Bank records, property transfers, campaign contributions, it all adds up. What do you want? Whitcomb whispered. I want you to understand that your choices have consequences. The system you've helped corrupt is bigger than this courtroom, bigger than this county. Meanwhile, at Murphy's Tavern, Sheriff Dillard held court at his usual table, surrounded by supporters. That lawyer thinks she's real smart, Dillard declared. Thinks she can come down here and tell us how to run our business. But this county belongs to us. Always has, always will. Deputy Mercer leaned forward eagerly. What you want us to do, Sheriff? Dillard's grin was all teeth. Tomorrow's the final day of the hearing, and I got a feeling our college girl is going to give us all the excuse we need to show her how we handle troublemakers in Marlowe County. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity on the third morning, every seat filled. Sheriff Dillard swaggered in like a man walking to his coronation, deputies flanking him. Judge Whitcomb entered with less theatrical flair, his face pale. Camille sat with perfect posture, her briefcase open beside her, revealing a small leather folder with an official seal. Your Honor, Camille said, rising, I have additional evidence to present. Dillard laughed loudly. More paperwork, college girl? Judge, how long are we going to let this woman waste everybody's time? I understand, Your Honor, Camille replied, reaching into her briefcase, but I think the court will find this evidence quite illuminating. She withdrew the leather folder like a weapon she had been waiting to draw. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Camille Johnson, and I am indeed an attorney, but that's not all I am. The courtroom fell silent. Camille opened the folder and held up a badge and identification that gleamed in the morning sunlight. I am also the Regional Director of the United States Marshal Service, Southern District, and for the past 6 months, I have been conducting a federal investigation into corruption, racketeering, and civil rights violations in Marlowe County. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Sheriff Dillard's face went from red to ashen gray. Judge Whitcomb gripped his gavel, knuckles white. The main doors burst open. United States Marshal Daniel Cross strode in with military precision, followed by 6 federal agents in crisp uniforms, badges gleaming. Sheriff Raymond Dillard, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and corruption under color of law. The courtroom exploded into chaos, but federal agents moved with professional efficiency, surrounding Dillard and his deputies. Deputy Mercer, you're under arrest for assault, intimidation of witnesses, and falsification of official documents. Mercer lunged toward Camille with a snarl, but 2 marshals tackled him, slamming him to the floor. Camille stood calm and unmoving, watching 15 years of corruption collapse like a house of cards. The truth had finally arrived in Marlowe County, and it had brought handcuffs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps
As the last of the federal vehicles pulled away from Marlowe County, their cargo of handcuffed deputies and corrupt officials bound for federal holding facilities in Birmingham. The crowd that had gathered to witness the morning's explosive revelations had long since dispersed, leaving behind only whispered conversations that would echo through the county for generations to come. Camille Johnson stood on the courthouse steps where Sheriff Dillard had once swaggered with impunity, her briefcase closed at her side, her cream-colored suit somehow still pristine despite the chaos of the day. "Miss Johnson," she turned to find Samuel Parker approaching with his family, their faces transformed by something that looked like wonder. The exhaustion that had lined Samuel's features for weeks
Was gone, replaced by the kind of peace that came from watching justice finally arrive after too many years of waiting. "Mr. Parker," Camille replied, her voice carrying warmth that had been carefully hidden during 3 days of legal theater. Samuel stopped before her, his weathered hands clasped in front of him, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you properly. What you did in there, what you've given back to us." "You don't need to thank me," Camille said gently. "You had the courage to stand up when it mattered. You trusted the system even when the system had failed you before. That's what made this possible." Lena Parker stepped forward, her quiet strength now radiating something that might have been joy. "You gave us back our dignity," she said simply. "You made them see that we matter." Michael, who had spent the morning watching his family's tormentors led away in handcuffs, struggled with words that seemed too small for what he was feeling. Finally, he looked up at Camille with eyes that held a new understanding. "I didn't believe," he said, his weathered voice cracking slightly. "When you first came here, when you said you could help us, I didn't believe the system would ever work for people like us. I thought you were just another lawyer making promises you couldn't keep." Camille studied the young man's face, seeing in it the same idealistic fire that had driven her own journey from this small Alabama town to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "And now?" she asked. "Now I know that sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. Sometimes justice isn't just a word they use in courtrooms. Sometimes it's real." Behind them, the courthouse doors opened, and Deputy Linda Red Carter emerged, no longer wearing her uniform. She had turned herself in immediately after the arrests, offering to cooperate fully with the federal investigation in exchange for leniency. Her red hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her face bore the exhausted relief of someone who had finally stopped carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear. She approached Camille hesitantly, her steps uncertain. "Miss Johnson, Director Johnson, I wanted to apologize for everything, for what we did to this family, for what I allowed to happen." Camille regarded her with the same steady gaze she had used throughout the trial, but now there was something softer in her expression. "Deputy Carter, you made a choice today, a difficult choice that took courage. That matters." "I should have made it sooner," Carter replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have stopped it before it went this far." "Perhaps," Camille agreed, "but you made it when it counted most. That's what we'll remember." Carter nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked away toward an uncertain future that was nonetheless brighter than the corrupt past she was leaving behind. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Camille found herself alone on the courthouse steps, looking out over the town that had shaped her but could never contain her. The streets of Marlowe County stretched before her, the same streets where her grandfather had been denied justice, where her mother had been barred from participation in the very system Camille now served at its highest levels. Marshal Daniel Cross emerged from the courthouse behind her, his official duties completed, his reports filed, his prisoner secured. He was a man of few words, but his presence had anchored every major operation they had conducted together over the past 5 years. "The corruption goes deeper than just Dillard's crew," he said quietly, joining her on the steps. "County commissioners, state officials, a network of kickbacks and backroom deals that stretches all the way to Montgomery." "I know," Camille replied. "This was just the beginning. You could have exposed all of it today, could have brought down the whole network in one coordinated strike." Camille's smile was tired but satisfied. "Sometimes you have to pull the weed out root by root, Daniel. Let them think the investigation stops here. Let them get comfortable again. Let them make mistakes." Cross nodded, understanding the long game they were playing. "How many more counties like this one?" Camille said,
Too many, but fewer than there were yesterday. As the evening shadows lengthened, Camille walked the quiet streets of her childhood one last time, past the school where she had learned that intelligence was both a gift and a weapon, past the church where her grandmother had taught her that justice delayed was not justice denied, merely justice preparing for the right moment to strike, past the library where a young black girl had dreamed of using the law to change the world. She paused at the edge of town, where the road stretched away toward Birmingham, toward Atlanta, toward the next corrupt system that needed to be dismantled piece by careful piece. Her rental car waited, engine running, federal plates gleaming in the dying light.
The Parker farmhouse was visible in the distance, its windows glowing with warm light as a family sat down to their first peaceful dinner in months. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, hopeful line that seemed to reach toward the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Camille allowed herself one moment of pure satisfaction, one breath of victory, before the weight of duty settled back onto her shoulders. She had returned to Marlowe County as a daughter coming home. She was leaving as an instrument of federal justice, carrying the burden and the privilege of her position into whatever battle waited beyond the horizon. Behind her, the courthouse clock tower chimed the hour, its bronze bell ringing out across a county where justice had finally come to call. The sound followed her as she drove away, a reminder that some victories echoed long after the victor had moved on to the next fight. In her rearview mirror, Marlowe County grew smaller and smaller, until it was nothing but a collection of lights in the Alabama darkness. But the lights stayed steady, no longer flickering with fear, no longer dimmed by corruption. Justice had planted its seeds in the red Alabama soil, and Camille Johnson carried the promise of their harvest into whatever darkness waited ahead. The road stretched endlessly before her, and she drove toward it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knew that the work was never finished, but that today, at least, the work had been done well. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not from storm clouds, but from the promise of battles yet to come, in counties yet to be liberated, in courtrooms yet to witness the triumph of truth over power. Camille smiled and drove faster into the night, carrying justice like a torch into the American darkness. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.